Thank you for coming tonight to the final reading in the Pennsylvania Tricentennial Poetry Series, sponsored by the Friends of the Scranton Public Library. We've been receiving assistance this year in addition to the support of the Friends from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts and from the Arts to the People program. And our series in one form or another, as yet not quite fully formulated, will be starting again next fall. Tonight, Susan Ray will be reading her poetry. She was raised in Lancaster County, currently lives in Phoenixville, just west of Philadelphia. She attended Drexel University, the University of Michigan. She got her MFA in creative writing from Goddard College in Vermont. She's been awarded a poetry fellowship from the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and her poetry has appeared in many publications. She's also a novelist, and her novel, The Glass Baby, is scheduled to be published by Houghton Mifflin. But tonight it's her poetry that we're looking forward to hearing. So let me introduce to you Susan Ray.
This is a small room, so you should be able to all hear me, though I have a rather fragile voice. At least this time I don't have a spring cold, which I did during my last reading. I don't know if you've heard those old BBC recordings of William Butler Yeats where the equipment was scratchy and he was very aged and his voice was cracked. Well, a few weeks ago I was the first contemporary poet to duplicate that effect. This poem, the one I'm beginning with, is called The Hammock, and is about a World War II Navy hammock once owned by the eldest brother of my husband. And this brother, whom I never met, was killed during the war. The hammock. This hammock from the war held your last sleep. I lie awake in it now, watching the sun fleck the oak with sharp bursts of light. There isn't a sound. Even a wren in the spruce is hushed. Sparrows motionless brown leaves. A gray squirrel granite, till he vanishes with a flick of his tail, flashing past the trunk of the oak, leaping successfully across a high blue death. His shadow lies still beside the hammock. The next poem, called Woman in Landscape, is a poem in 3 sections, and it was written for a friend of mine whose only child died of a rare disease at the age of 3. She turned to me for comfort, and this poem represents what comfort I had to offer. Woman in Landscape. 1. These mornings the snow is blue, holding on to night. Icy white feathers are splayed across the window pane, as if your voice had frozen there, telling me about your child's death. I watch the weather harden. Beneath the window, trees cast off their shadows like burdens, bearing down on the white earth. Swooping out of the pine, a junco flies above them. Imagine the precise wings beating. Imagine, as it lifts into one blue space visible above the oak, how it leaves behind an absence cut in the air. Into this empty space around which the landscape forms, imagine a woman staring intently, not as if there were nothing to see. 2. After a loss, the days pile up in drifts. This field, straining under the suffocating snow, a few ridges of dry stalk that have been swags of color, yarrow and brown-eyed Susans, the stone barn where horses rest in stalls thick with their weighty breath, you would feel this quiet as a kind of pain. Along the road, the tangled shrubs curve into the snow. Sassafras, wineberry, sumac, rose, nouns of summer. Picture a woman reaching toward them, bent forward, held in a gesture of listening. It is as if the horses will never return to graze sleekly, head to head, among the invisible grasses, as if words cannot penetrate such distance, your grief arching over me like the winter sky. Oh, my friend, the scenery can't contain so much silence. It breaks open, the expanse of morning slashed by a redwing's cry. 3. The sky's one arc is black. Wind slaps a tree branch against the window, like the beating of memory that swings your voice toward me and away. Though night blots out the landscape, I know by heart the curves of the garden's receding terraces, how morning drops its hard chunks of light into the trees, and latticed branches complicate the skyline. In the nearby crib, my son breathes lightly, and my body remembers how he moved. If only I could peer past everything to where a woman stands in daylight, gazing at the sun. She is thin, her shadow a pencil mark scoring the earth, her figure poised against a distant hedgerow at the edge of what is hers, the sun tinting her shoulders, centered in that light which projects her own form dark on the grasses at her feet, like a slender needle pointing out from the heart. The next poem is called The Blinding, and was written at a time when my husband was having serious trouble with his eyes, about which we were very concerned. They say night could harden over your brown eyes like painted glass mirroring the sky. I would look into darkness in your face. It is evening. A starling postures on the lawn, muttering, beak raised, warnings rising out of the wet black feathers. You run one finger gently down my cheek. Over your shoulder, I see the houses in the village rear immovable stone fronts. Behind the darkening forms of the trees, light splinters on the hard edge of that hill, a few shards falling past your hair. You seem to feel them vanish. Don't turn away from my face. Colors flash between us, undiminished, arc over the visible world. I always believe that one should begin a poetry reading with a light poem, and as you may have already noticed, this becomes a problem for me because I don't write light poems. I have, however, interspersed among the sorrow a few poems in a slightly different vein. This one is called Canning Plums, and it was written at a time when we were living in the city and trying to pretend we were living in the country, going out and gathering up produce and canning and making jelly. And in a moment of madness, one very hot day, we bought 3 baskets of overripe plums. We carried them back into the city, where by the time we got back from the country, it was about 96 or 97 degrees. Our air conditioner broke down, and I stood in our windowless kitchen all afternoon canning the plums. I was at the time reading Robert Graves's book, The White Goddess, and I had just finished the section on the Welsh goddess Caradwen, who used to stand over her kettle and inhale the fumes for inspiration. And the difference between her case and mine led to this poem. One point I should probably mention for those of you who are wise enough never to have canned plums. When you do home canning, the little metal lids have a dent which goes down when the jar is sealed with a little clicking sound. And that's referred to in the poem. Canning plums. They stare out of the jars at me, malevolent little witch eyes redder than insomnia. It would be suicide to run from such a gaze. It flatfoots after me like an offended magpie, or burns into my bones like a bad dream. I have to wait for another day when the trees are bare as stones and all the plums pit deep in snow, packed permanently away. Meanwhile, I lay them warm in their round cribs like uncivil children. They are talking in their sleep. All night I hear them counting themselves like metallic sheep. 52 click, 53 click. My mind's all thumbs. I'm the unwilling keeper of a growing glass museum, jailing little fruits, stirring deeper and deeper. Caradwen, mad at her kettle, summoning up only plums, plums. The next two poems are about my son, and since I believe in starting at the beginning, the first one is called Dreaming of Pregnancy. I wrote this at a time when I was consciously not interested in having children, but kept dreaming night after night about having a child. And I kept telling everyone how absurd this was, but my dreams were not convinced. And after a time, I came to believe that the children in my dreams had a life of their own. This is Dreaming of Pregnancy. They come to me at night, the children, asking for this gift. They want to be set free from the stone, to begin returning. They think it is enough to be someone else. They say I am lonely, living in this self that has never risen. It's the sun's metallic flowers glinting in the woods they want, and dogwood berries strung like wooden beads on the twigs. They tire of perfection. In the morning, they must be gone. I have explained this to them in the darkness again and again. They do not understand. And then a poem from his infancy called Lullaby. The window is draped in darkness, simpler than dawn silhouettes, poplars inked on a thin blue line before the sky whitens and the trees take on a third dimension. At my breast, the baby sighs, stretching out one arm toward the blackened glass, as if he dreamed of everything I have forgotten. The lamp casts against the chair a parabola, pellucid and limiting. Its glow slips through the gaps between his curled fingers. The room is filled with impossible distances. Slowly his hand shuts. He turns away his head. Beyond the orderly rows of toys on the shelf, the crib waits. I give him back to the dark from which he was wakened. This next poem grows out of an experience I had of teaching several classes. This is English classes of predominantly engineering students whose first priority in life was clearly not English literature and clearly not reading. So when I saw in the middle of the semester one of my students thoroughly engrossed in reading something, I couldn't resist tiptoeing around behind him to see what he was reading. The title was Solid-Liquid Separation, an Overview. And in response to that incident, I wrote this poem. It's called Solid-Liquid Separation, an Overview. People have pointed out to me on a number of occasions that that title has very little to do with the poem. So, since it's in 3 sections, I've also titled each section. Those titles don't have much to do with the poem either, but it creates a stronger impression that I tried. 1. Flight. I clap my hands. A black foliage swarms out of the trees. One speck detaching itself from distance, floating toward us. This is what I want, the slow, dark, circling flight before it becomes a bird again. The sky like a liquid glassed in, held by that invisible spiral. The length of your body curled in a pond of sun. As autumn pours over us, you look up. The crows are clacking, rough beaks stripping the dogwood berries. Red spills into the leaves. 2. Memory. Once the sky broke, hurtling through the windshield of a car. Vision split at the center. A swirl of road, 2 clouds, half a circle of trees, melted, streaming across my body, the air beating its wings. I held out my hands to no one. After the crash, the solid blue sphere returned. Little was left of the car, a tire lying in the road, a twisted metal frame. On the seat, a jagged stain where needles of glass plunged their colorless, sharp feathers, markers noting the first trails into an unmapped country. 3. Loss. Outside our window, the woods enamels yellow, red, and brown peninsulas, jutting into the gray sea that washes through this room. Here we've made a place for love, where I define you with my fingertips, lingering over the hard certainties of bone, the spine, the shoulder blades folded back like wings. The sky ebbs against the dips and ridges of our bodies, islanded on the bed. A last autumn robin coasts toward the aspen grove, sailing past your arm. You fumble for your clothes. Soon the afternoon will be torn out of us, falling away like black water, the first sound we hear after sleep. The next poem is based on an afternoon when an uncle of mine had sort of a mini stroke in the presence of the assembled family. It's called Stroke. After the family dinner, language is trivial and easy until you lose it, uncle, asking for something you want, which suddenly has no name. God damn, you moan. Give me a, all I want's a, Jesus Christ, ain't you got one? The family hands you sweaters, pills, ice picks, glasses of brandy, bread. They rush at you with objects. If they find what you mean, they think they won't have to name this dying, watch you leave them word by word. Frequently, I do bird and animal poems, and these next few fall into that category. The first one was written when I found a dead ovenbird on our front porch and was struck by the absolute beauty of the creature. It's called Ovenbird. I found her nearly warm, unruffled. Even in this grayish light, her feathers gleam olive. The birthmark on her head rusts. She looks shy, not dead, curled quietly into this new nest. Only the pink feet betray her, gripping a last branch of the air. And the eyes, half closed and entirely dark, ringed in exquisite white feathers. Each black fleck on her breast is separately, precisely etched, an immaculate white patch engraved on her throat, the fine beak slightly ajar, holding this one note. I can cup her entire in my hand, admitting her song, fingering death, its remarkable softness. The next poem is called The Fox, though it's actually not about a fox, but about the absence of a fox. I was told that if I went to a certain spot at 5 o'clock and waited there, the fox came there every day. So I got up at 4:30 in the morning, went and sat there, and no fox showed. And so the poem turned into a poem eventually about vision. After I had written the poem, I found out that I was supposed to have been there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But you'll notice that in the poem I changed the time of day to evening and pretended that the whole thing was the fox's fault. The Fox. A neighbor promised me the fox would come to drink at this pond, his evening ritual. Waiting an hour, I have seen only the closely growing trees, barring me out of the water they have entered. Wind parts the meadow grass, as if a fox trotted toward me, a scarlet brush among ferns clinging to the bank. I can almost see him bending into the pond, where a red stain surfaces to consume him. Leaning into himself, he stares at the spreading body. I want him to drink it in, black eyes and pointed ears, pendulous tongue, trees, the flat gray slab of sky braced across the pond, its rim still caged by the stiff trunks. Wind crawls across the pond. As the water plats and unplats itself, the trees unravel. Somewhere a fox stirs. The pond enters him. And the last animal poem is in a somewhat different vein. When we moved to the country, the first spring we were there, we started hearing strange noises in the house for days. And then finally, one day, a starling appeared in the pantry. We chased him out, and that ended the noises. Well, the next year, this happened again, and it became an annual ritual until I decided that someone was trying to tell me something. I wrote this poem, and I don't know what I think of it as a poem, but we haven't had a starling in the pantry since I wrote it. A starling in the pantry. Our house was cracking its bones, mumbling in the rafters like an old lady about to cast the evil eye, looking for the talismanic line, the word that would light up the whole sky. The same sickness rattles my own bones. Even the vents were lousy with scratching. Our local poltergeist, we thought, a ghost with sharp toenails, till he found a fault in the ceiling and catapulted through, a feathered astronaut, pulled himself out of air like a black magician. He wasn't the bird for nevermores, this chap with the Pinocchio nose gawking and quivering in his short pants. He wasn't the type you ask for dinner, wambling around the larder, old yellow legs, whose lady must have been dropping elusive billy-doo. He wasn't a visiting uncle. His eye had an embarrassed squint, as if he really wanted to ask me for the men's room. So I drove him out the door with a broom, a crazed bayoneteer, or a witch forcing Hansel into the pan with the mint. The whole blue sky was his. He didn't appreciate that until it hit him smack like a custard pie, and then he soared, lapping up freedom like a cat, up, up, over the housetop, a home run, over the trees, and disappeared a black star into white sky. The house settled like a spoiled cake, fell back on its silence with a swept and empty mind. But every watching rafter knew my kind. I was the fool who swabbed and paid the rents, and he was the word the walls spoke. This next poem, titled Home Movies, I wrote when I learned that a man whom I had known in my childhood and liked very much had gone insane. The father of my childhood friend laughed more easily than any man I knew. I used to envy my friend. Sometimes when I visited her, her father showed home movies. I sat on a stool near the projector and watched him make a yellow rose unfurl in immaculate slow motion. From the white shaft of light he pulled color, flamingos on a hill, the scalloped orange tiles roofing a Swiss town, scarved and mittened carolers in their bright wools, the pastels of the opening flowers. Often he stopped to reverse the film, so that his stout wife in the kitchen backed briskly away from a drawer to which a wooden spoon had flown out of her hand. Flour leapt from bowl to cup like a snowstorm drawn into one still center. Once, a startling red bird swooped tail first to a limb, down out of a splash in the sky, and withdrew its rayed wings so smoothly it seemed to disappear. I've never felt more entirely safe than I did there at his feet in the half-dark, lost in the illusions of my childhood. Today I heard news, how his wife dead. He sits motionless on a blanket, his fingers folded methodically over the edge of the mattress, and stares at a window he thinks is a wall. So tightly time shuts around our losses. I wish I could say where the heart stores those moments that open silently, unexpectedly. In one of them, he stands in that rush of light and laughs at his golden-haired daughters running backwards. Once when we first moved to the country, we had a neighbor who was on extremely intimate terms with God and given to informing the neighbors about God's opinions of certain things. And one of the things that God most strongly disapproved of was poetry. And when she found out that I wrote it, she told me to be sure to stay in my own yard. This poem is called Property Line. Having told me poetry is sinful, she adds that I must stay out of her yard, stringing those words between us, a wire that spikes the sun. Caught there, an orange balloon, it is punctured, light leaks away. She wears the darkness smartly, like a navy cape. I am shocked. My poems are shocked. We hold a conference, consider hanging ourselves along the property line. Strung between two worlds, we'd be shredded on the cetaceous air. Or perhaps she could mine my sedum, blow us all into the barbed dark. She must be very watchful. Poems are everywhere, little Houdinis always escaping. Another inch of tendril, and my grapevine will have trespassed. How innocently it creeps, plumping out its silent purple wishes. My borage leans across her fence, humming. Raspberries offer up their clustered brooches, and day shatters the stone night into pink gems, into cries of love. Think of that. Would she freeze the birds to the air like a wallpaper pattern? May their song always fall onto my side of the driveway, stirring the dust. She'll never keep poems out. Every night they'll slip into her closed cage, trundling along their airs and griefs and hungry bodies. This is another poem about poetry, this one about writing poems. It's called The Cornfield and is dedicated to the poet Catherine Stripling. At dawn, I saw a man in a cornfield, bowing to the rows of stalks, his body a darkness in the mist, until the sun pierced him, and I saw how willingly he submitted himself to those green watchers. Near him, a deer, struck by a car, lay dead beside the road. Somewhere, you are leaning over a sheet of unbroken white, the words to darken it rising slowly out of your body as the field waits, the deer's legs still curved in the leap that flashed past someone's face, a dance cast in sheer air. The first time that my husband and I were separated for a length of time, we made an agreement that every night at a certain hour we would both go out and look at the moon. Then at that time each of us would know where the other was and what the other was doing. And it all sounded very romantic, but it was not a satisfactory substitute for other activities. This poem is called The Pact. This is the time we agreed on to look separately at the moon. It will be as if, you said, we are together. But the moon has no time to comfort me, casting blue shadows over the bushes. Below the hollow arch of sky, I stare, stony-faced, toward your absence. Soon the train arrives, as if you were on it, headlight wounding a row of trees. which bleed green. The train doesn't appear to be moving, faces inside drowning in a greenish glow. Yet it departs, the tracks behind it unstitching like spoiled embroidery. The trees are welded fast to night, the bushes immovable. Darkness keeps each one in its separate station, and the moon comes between us. And this next is a happier love poem, brilliantly titled Love Poem. Warned for years what too much love would do, I settled for never enough. I didn't have a body, sleeping in the attic, spare and still, suns falling past the tiny window, blooded, always the maples whispering below, rattling with leaves, rattling with emptiness. Too much sleeping woke me. My arms opened first, so tired of carrying their loneliness. Now my body belongs to you. It cannot help itself. The fears that come to me night and day are not of love. There is no darkness in this. The sun paints our bodies simple and shining. This next poem was written for a small child in our community who asked me once if I would be willing to be her mother. In fact, she didn't just ask me, she presented me with a resume. If I would be her mother, she would dry the dishes, she would hand me the clothespins when I wanted to hang up the laundry. She had a long list of advantages. And actually, it was a sad request because her request for a mother who took an interest in her was unfortunately not unfounded. And it was also sad because I was helpless to do anything to help her. And finally, there was an incident which for me epitomized her whole situation. And this is Poem for Marcia. The dog bit me, you insist. I stand beside your mother on the far side of the driveway. Gravel pits my bare feet. You do not come close, huddled into yourself in a way I recognize. All 4 of your years gathered tightly together. Your glasses are a shield. Behind them, your sobs sharpen. Their terror arrows into me, and I see myself running. Your mother glances at you casually. There are no marks, she says, but I see them. Such wounds are the deepest. Calmly, she tells me, you were bitten once. Across the stones, you run to me. Marcia, there are no rescues here, only words, which are no comfort to you, to either of us. And finally, for the last poem, another poem about a child in trouble. This one, an attempt to offer certainly more comfort than the last poem. This one is addressed to a child who, at the age of 10, suffered a schizophrenic breakdown. Her condition, it seemed to me, was like someone drowning, and that's the title and metaphor for the poem, Girl Drowning. I see how the blue world swallows you. You choke on air like water. The level of suffocation rises to meet you. When it reaches your lips, you will stop screaming. The invisible water will cover your ears. Your eyes, for the moment, will close, 2 ruined ponds. the sky will be gone. Soon you will disappear entirely. I watch you submerge, dark curls floating on the surface. There is no way to save you from my own many deaths, from the deep, twisted wisdom we ladies of the river know. Perhaps I wouldn't save you if I could. Life has a gift for daughters of this sea change, though it may be small consolation to the drowned to live again. There is, I promise you, the slow, breathless rise to the surface, the time lapse spreading again of the bright sky, a montage of trees, wings, angel clouds, a burst of air, and all the dancing, rainbow-surfaced bubbles. How do I get out of this?
I'd like to invite you.